個 wall of air sac 係 one cell 式啦，所以另外啲 capillary surrounding the air sac 都係 one cell 式啦，所以去 reduce diffusion distance 啦，所以 increase 咗個 diffusion speed 啦，誒個 inner surface 係 moist 啦，所以有一個 water film 去俾嗰啲 inhaled gas dissolve 啦。And the air sac align really closely to the capillaries again to reduce the diffusion distance. Okay, so finally, trachea, bronchioles. Trachea 有 cartilage 係咪？個 cartilage 係咩 shape 啊
？C shape。
點解要 C shape 啊？
因為佢俾佢食到即係擴張啊，即係
係啦，
落去嗰陣。
係啦，俾個 esophagus 去 expand 啦 during swallowing 啦。Bronchus 個 cartilage 係 ring shape 啦。Functions of the cartilage during breathing in or breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out 會唔會啊 ？Breathing out 就應該唔會啦。OK， and then bronchioles 有冇 cartilage 啊？有啲有啲冇嘅，有啲冇嘅。一啲細啲嘅 bronchioles 咧就有嘅，一啲細啲嘅 bronchioles 就冇嘅，一啲大啲嘅 bronchioles 就有嘅。咁咧如果冇 cartilage，會有啲咩事發生啊？會容易點啊？如果冇 bronchial support 佢嘅話，如果有啲 chemical stimulate 到佢嘅話咧，其實上邊個 wall 都仲有啲 muscle 喺度噶嘛，係咪？嗰啲 smooth muscle 一 contract 咧就會收窄晒個 bronchioles，咁就冇氣冇 gaseous 入到 air sac 啦，或者個 volume of gaseous that can be moved into the air sacs 會 drops 啦，因為個 bronchioles 個 lumen size drop 咗啦。咁如果 volume of gas move into the air sac decreases, what will happen? If the muscles on the bronchioles contract and less air is moving into the air sacs, then what will happen? Less gas for gaseous exchange, true, but why? True 啦 ，less gas for gaseous exchange， 咁都冇乜問題㗎。有啲咩問題咧？少咗 gas for gaseous exchange。即係原本係咁樣啦，而家咧變咗咁樣，變一齊唔變先。With heat, so CO2 out啦 originally, so now CO2 out no change, right? But O2 in drops. So the concentrations of oxygen here will drop because you have the same volume of gas within the air sac, but then you have less air that is moving into the air sac. So once they mix together, the concentration of oxygen drops compared to normal cases. So if oxygen concentration drops, then concentration gradient across of O2 啦。The wall of blood capillaries and air sac also drops So if that happens, then diffusion rate also drops. So rate of gaseous exchange also drops. So if rate of gaseous exchange drops, then blood oxygen level increases. Decreases. 咁咪少咗 less oxygen is supplied to other any types of body cells. So we are talking about just a change in the lumen size here of the bronchioles, but ASX is still that big.
T-Con，我想問呢個係即係咩 scenario 先會發生？即係依個依家射緊嗰啲嘢係咩情況先要發生
？Bronchioles 收縮。
OK。
Let's say the muscles on the wall of bronchioles contract， 咁所以就 lumen 就跌啦。lumen 跌，所以就 less air enter， 所以 concentration gradient of O2 across 個咩就 drop。Okay, so逐樣計嘅。The concentration of one thing does not affect the concentration of the other thing. So let's say you have this is water, and then you have 5 glucose in it. Let's say sub cm cube of water. Then the concentration of glucose would be 5 per 10 cm cube. So amount of glucose within the number volume of water. But let's say if you add something in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you add, let's say, sucrose in. So you are still having 10 cm cube of water. Then in this case, the concentration will still be the same because the amount of glucose is not changing. The volume of the solvent it is in does not change. So no matter how much you dissolve in it, the concentration of particular one molecules remains the same. Okay, so keep going. ASX 搞掂啦。ASX 完咗之後咧 we were moving into talk about the transport of gases, right? So once the oxygen move in, after they diffuse in the water film, 有個 process of gaseous exchange That means 點樣 dissolve, diffuse 嗰啲咧，唔再同大家講啦，嗰啲大家自己睇下自己個 process 就得啦。After the oxygen move in to the blood, then how is the red blood cells? How is the oxygen being transported? So you have the air sac here. You have O2 go in, binds to hemoglobin here. So hemoglobin return into oxyhemoglobin. Right? So this only happen conditions will be only in high O2 concentration. When the blood keep flowing to an area, let's say you have lots of body cells there, and then in that case, hemoglobin, the O2 goes out. That means in that case, the oxyhemoglobin return back into O2 plus hemoglobin, because why would this happen? It's only because the conditions here is that the O2 concentration is low. When the O2 concentration in this area is low, the red blood cell will tend to release its O2 from the hemoglobin. When the surrounding concentration of O2 is high, then the red blood cells will tend to take in the oxygen to bind with the hemoglobin. So that's the oxygen. How about carbon dioxide? Is another story. So you start with the body cells there. So in the body cells here, so condition is there is a high CO2 concentration. When there is lots of body cells, they carry out respirations, take in oxygens, remove carbon dioxide, release carbon dioxide, and the CO2 comes in. So under high CO2 concentration, so CO2 goes into the red blood cells. After it goes into the red blood cells, it comes out as HCO3 plus, right? So, HCO3 minus. So there is an enzyme within the red blood cells that will turn carbon dioxide using water and then turn it into H plus and then HCO3 minus, so that the CO2 won't dissolve in blood and get traveled, won't dissolve in the plasma. So once this HCO3 plus keep traveling, eventually back to the air sac here. So the condition here is that it has low CO2 concentrations. Under situations, you still have red blood cells here, right? You still have the enzymes here, right? So the HCO3 minus will get back into the red blood cells, turn it back into CO2, and then CO2 diffuse out. So HCO3 minus, again, combine with hydrogen again, turn it back into water, turn it back into carbon dioxide. So only when there is low CO2 concentrations. So when low CO2 concentrations, HCO3 minus move into the red blood cells and get turned into CO2. When there is high concentration of CO2, CO2 move into the red blood cells and get turned into HCO3 minus. You can consider it in this way. You have the enzyme. This is the same enzyme. You can consider it in this way. If the concentration of CO2 here is high, that means HCO3 minus the concentration is low, right? So the chance for the CO2 molecules to compete with the HCO3 minus, to compete for the active site of this enzyme, the chance of CO2 to win will be higher. So more chance for CO2 to bind into this enzyme, more chance for the CO2 to get turned into HCO3 minus. But when you look back at condition where CO2 concentration is low, when CO2 concentration is low, that means that on the other hand, if you look at it, then HCO3 concentration will be relatively higher. So if that's the case, that means that the chance for this one to win the competitions for the active site of that particular enzyme will be higher. More chance for HCO3 to get bind into the enzyme there, and more chance for HCO3 to get turned into CO2 rather than the other way. All right, so CO2 can diffuse out in that case. So that's how the transport of gases. So we are running out of time. So after the transport of gases, we still have a few things. We have ventilations. That means the way that we breathe in and the mechanisms that we breathe out. We also need to be able to, when you look at the graph, you know that which sections of the graph refer to breathing in, which section of the graph refers to breathing out. And finally, we said that for one breath, it means one inhale and one exhale. We call it one breath. And you have to be able to look into the graph and then be able to calculate the breathing rate. So that's the whole chapters. So because we are running out of time, so if you have questions, you can stay behind. If you have no questions, you can go and have your lunch.係梗係要啦。Calculate breathing rate 嗱，OK，我老作啦，我老作，我當呢度係 time，呢個係 volume of lungs，咁就 breathe，咁 let's say 呢度係1啦，呢度係0啦，呢度係2啦。Breathing rate 等於 amount of breath per minute. Number of breath per minute 係等於 breathing rate。簡單數學題啫，點計？1 breath 等於1 inhalations plus 1 exhalations。So now the lungs volume increase, that means this is inhalations. And this part, the lungs volume decreases. This is exhalations, right? So this here is 1 breath. So this here is 1 breath. That means the speed of breathing is one breath speed of breathing. That means rate of breathing per 1 second. So now they are asking you the breathing rate. So breathing rate, we usually look into the minute. So breathing rate refers to the number of breaths per minute. So 1 second, 1 breath. So 60 seconds, 60 breaths per minute。數學題啫，其實唔係爆題嘅。The key is you should be able to know to read the time required for 1 breath. You have to be able to interpret the graph so that you know that which part refer to inhalation, which part refer to exhalation, so that you know the time for 1 breath is how long, and then you turn it back into 1 minute. Alright? 有冇其他問題？係。OK，elastic tissues 咧就梗係只係攞嚟做 elastic recoil 啦，淨係攞嚟彈嘅啫。咁 如果個 lung 嘅 elastic tissue 有咩用咧？就係、令到個 lung can be expand to a bigger volume, so that more gas can move in to the lung 咯。但係咧，你話啲 smooth muscles 咧，純就唔嗱，let's say this is the lumen 啦，of the trachea, and then you have some smooth muscles surrounding this trachea, right? So when this smooth muscle contract, then your trachea lumen size drops. When the smooth muscle contract, lumen size 就會跌啦。咁當然係唔好嘅嘢啦。當佢 contract，你點都係想佢擴大啲好啦。So when the smooth muscle relax, the lumen size increases 咯。So the significance of this is that when the smooth muscles relax, then when the lumen size increases, you get more air to be brought in to the air sac. So the functions of the smooth muscles here is to slightly regulate the amount of air that can be brought in to the air sac. But for being elastic, the elastic tissues is to allow the whole lungs to be able to expand to a greater volume. Right? 有冇其他？No，呢個一個 cell 咧叫做 epithelial cell， 一排 cell 咧就叫做 epithelium。So epithelium just mean a layer of epithelial cells. Yeah.唔一定，所以佢要係 ciliated epithelial cells 咧先至有 cilia。所以如果嗰個 epithelium 唔係 ciliated 嘅話咧，就冇 cilia 咯。咁不過喺呢個 trachea 上面揾到啲都係 ciliated 㗎。其實 epithelium 呢個字純粹就只係解話最外層的 cell 咁解咯，所以 epithelium 純粹就係話最外層的 layer 的 cell 咯。咁所以 所以我哋話點解佢係一個 adaptive features 咧？就係因為呢一層 epithelial compare 到其他身體嘅其他部分，任何身體任何 organ 都有最外層嘅 cell 啦，係咪？逢親最外層嘅 cell 佢就係 epithelium 啦。但係喺 trachea 嗰度咧，嗰個 epithelium 嗰個最外層嘅 cell 咧，上邊咧就有啲 cilia 喺度嘅，所以佢就會變成一個 adaptive features for 個 lung for breathing 咯。點解會變 carbon dioxide 如果 oxygen？ 咦唔係喎，你要分開 oxygen 同 carbon dioxide 喎，因為你要諗 carbon dioxide 點嚟喎 ？carbon dioxide 係講緊個 body cell carry out respirations。take in 咗 oxygen， 最後放翻 CO2 出嚟，所以先至有 carbon dioxide。carbon dioxide 唔係喺個 red blood cell 入邊變喎。總之 red 等我一陣。 咁咧個 functions of the red blood cell 純粹就係 transport 啫喎，即係話個 red blood cell 只係用嚟 carry 住啲 oxygen 周街走啫。邊個需要咧就抌夠 oxygen 俾佢咯。咁譬如喺個 air sac 嗰度，個 red blood cell 攞 oxygen 啦。咁點樣攞 oxygen 咧？你要有個位擠個 oxygen 入個 red blood cell 度，先至 red blood cell 可以 carry 佢行噶嘛。咁所以 red blood cell 入邊有 hemoglobin 就有個 oxygen 嘅 binding site，就係嚿 hemoglobin 俾個位個 oxygen 去黐上去。咁所以個 red blood cell 咧就可以 carry 住個 oxygen 周街走啦。咁當個 red blood cells carry 住咗個 oxygen 周街走嘅時候，去到 body cells 需要 oxygen 嘅時候咧，咁佢咪抌翻粒 oxygen 出嚟咯。咁只不過我哋俾到個名啫，就係冇 carry 住任何 oxygen 嗰嚿嘢咧，就只係叫做 hemoglobin，而黐住咗 oxygen 嗰嚿 hemoglobin 咧，我就俾多個名佢叫做 oxyhemoglobin 啫，咁樣啫。咁但係 O2 同 CO2 嘅轉化就純粹係 respiration 喺個 body cells 度做咯，即係 carry oxygen 就係其中一個 red blood cell 嘅 functions。第二個 red blood cell 嘅 function 就係佢唔單止可以 carry oxygen， 佢仲有一隻 enzyme 可以做第二樣嘢 ，which is 嗰隻 enzyme 咧會將 CO2 轉成 HCO3-，亦都會將 HCO3- 轉翻到 CO2 咁咯。但係佢從來就唔影響 oxygen 同 CO2 自己嘅轉換咯。係啦。因為 CO2 溶咗落 blood 嗰度嘅時候咧，佢會令到個 blood pH drops 啊嘛。咁所以即係如果你睇呢幅圖啊，個 body cells 放 carbon dioxide 出嚟 ，carbon dioxide 就入血啦，係咪？一入血咧，個 CO2 會溶水啊，溶落你個 blood 度啦，就話溶落你個 blood 度之後就 form 咗隻 carbonic acid， 咁就酸，咁會影響個 pH of 個 plasma， 最後會影響嗰啲 pH of 個 tissue fluid 啦，咁最後就影響晒啲 enzyme 啦。咁所以唔想呢件事發生，所以咧就將 CO2 轉咗做一啲唔影響 pH 的東西，就將 CO2 轉咗做 HCO3- 啦。HCO3- 就唔會影響個 pH 咯。咁所以就去到翻個 air sac 嘅時候，先將啲 HCO3- 轉翻到 CO2， 然之後再 breathe 翻 out 咯。唔俾個 CO2 直接喺個血度流咯。Purplish red 係 hemoglobin，oxyhemoglobin 係 bright red。Yes。好，唔使，拜拜。